Good afternoon. Welcome to the Roundtable. This evening we're going to be discussing police officers and their effect on the Native and Black communities and just society at large. I'm Derrick. I am a part-time activist, mostly writer though, double master's degree student. And I'm going to let my other panelists introduce themselves and we'll get started.
This is Anne Marie, and I do Not Your Mascots, and we just had a rally between the Eagles and the Washington team Monday night. And I've been doing this red and black, trying to get the Native and Black together.
Excellent. Yeah, I saw some of the pictures that you shared with us of that protest. That has some really good art.
Yeah.
And our last panelist.
My name is Julie Dye, and I live in Jackson, Michigan, and I'm part of the Michigan Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media. Mm-hmm. And we have a couple projects going on, but our main project is the working with the high school, the Mascot schools in Michigan.
Oh, excellent. I think I've heard a lot of the other shows that you've done as well. I'm really, really happy to have you here with us. Does anybody, well, if nobody objects, I was going to go ahead and just start with my kind of experiences with the cops, and then we can just take it from there. Or unless one of you would like to go first.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, my experience with the cops definitely wasn't one that was adversarial, at least growing up. I had a stepfather who was a sheriff in the South. And he kind of grew up, well, he kind of like taught me as I was growing up, like not to talk to certain other cops and things. Like I was always supposed to just go to him, or I was on this T-ball team called the Roadrunners. And that was all coached by, you know, the 4 or 5 other Black sheriff officers in the state, or at least in that city, not in the entire state, in that city, excuse me. And so I grew up having a much more positive image of police than I would say my peers did. Growing up, kind of as the crack epidemic was kind of like coming down south in like the 90s and the war on drugs was kind of intensifying, I started noticing, I would say, a difference in how I perceived the police as a person who like was growing up with a sheriff in his house, and then like how a lot of people who like lived in, say, my grandmother's neighborhood, my cousin's neighborhoods, how they were perceiving police. And I started learning a lot more about like the struggles that even my stepdad had with his job. And he eventually was he got into a really, really bad accident where he hit a structure and the car flipped. He had to relearn to walk. So that kind of ended his policing career. But I just started to realize that how the law works, it kind of doesn't matter what your individual opinion of one individual officer is. So like I kind of used to I was never like a caper for the police officers, but I could understand like what it was like to have like a parent who was like worried about, is he going to come home safely? You know, oh, he's a little late tonight. Did something happen? So I could kind of see that angle of it. Growing up and then seeing kind of like what happened after Hurricane Katrina, what happened after several just disruptive events in the South and in the Delta region in particular, I kind of started to understand where other opinions, more hostile opinions towards the police came from, because I kind of started to see that it doesn't matter what one individual cop kind of does a lot of the times. When a person has a bad experience with the police, that is their experience with the police moving forward. And I kind of learned that you can't really even tell. I used to kind of feel that I could tell who was a good cop and who was a bad cop. And I learned that that wasn't true. So I feel like most black people come from this from an angle where they had an adversarial position, or they felt an exceptional mistrust of cops from the very beginning. I would say that I felt a moderate level of distrust from cops from the beginning, because I was only ever supposed to talk to my stepdad if I ever did see anything or something ever did happen. So he definitely never wanted me. He definitely knew and understood the dangers that young African-American men come into when they have lots of exposure to law enforcement, particularly law enforcement that's kind of like geared towards attacking the poor. But it's gotten steadily worse over time. So now I'm kind of like at a 180, not at a total 180, because it wasn't totally a turnabout, but that's my own experience. I'd be really, really interested in hearing kind of where you all come from this at.
Mm-hmm. You want to go next, Dan?
Actually, you can go ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, my situation is I grew up. I was born in Pawpaw, Michigan, and the whole area, southwestern Michigan, is a rural white farming community.
Mm-hmm.
And we had probably 99% of the area are Caucasians, and very few minority persons at all. Mm-hmm. And really, my tribe didn't have a reservation until 1994, until we got federally recognized. So we really didn't live in a concentrated area where it was Native people lived together. We were spread out in small towns, and just kind of we retained a community that we'd all get together, but we were really kind of isolated in our own little communities. So we really didn't have the interaction that I can remember as a kid with the police department wasn't a really bad one until something happened. I can remember when I was 15, my brother was killed in a car accident in front of our house, and he was riding his bicycle, and he was hit by an off-duty high school bus driver. And there was no investigation. There was no ticket issued. And they just pretty much didn't do anything about it. And when my mother went to the courthouse in Pawpaw to get the death certificate, they wouldn't give it to her. They refused.
Wow.
And so my mother called my aunt from Detroit, and my aunt came down, and she was really, really mad. And we ended up organizing a protest out in front of the sheriff's department, and the sheriff was really bigoted, and a lot of their racism came out then because someone that worked inside the courthouse said that the guy just went berserk. He was just screaming and yelling and saying, "Get the damn Indians off of this property," and just, it was really ugly. It made the media, and so that incident stuck out in my mind. It's like, until something happens that was really kind of benign, the whole law enforcement thing, because I mean, if you live out in the rural areas, the police really didn't mess with you too much, because they kept to themselves, and it was really a quiet. We didn't live in in the urban area, or it was a lot of activity or a lot of things going on and a big concentration of people. So yeah, that was my situation growing up, and that was kind of, until communication came about, until you've read things in the paper and you read it online, and you don't realize what's going on in the rest of the world.
That is,
Yeah.
my condolences about your brother.
Thank you.
What were you saying, Ann?
Yeah. So that was your first interaction with the police when you lost your brother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really horrible. I lived in Michigan, so I know the area, lower Michigan, and out this way it's pretty much the same thing, except we have, when you go into Philly and New York, it's completely different. But I grew up in a small town, and when I was younger, we just waved to the cops and everything was cool. And, I grew up thinking they were friendly. And then as you get older, you start to realize that there's this going on and that going on. And, now with, Facebook and Twitter and social media, how fast stories go through, you find out that there's a reason for Black Lives Matter, and how often the police interact, and it doesn't always go the way you think it would. So, and out here, I see how the cops are different in Pennsylvania versus New Jersey cops, and then local cops and state cops. Mm-hmm. And then, like, when I lived in Michigan, the police, they're a little different out there too. And I was in Ann Arbor near Detroit, and I would hear stories from Detroit, the things that the cops would do to, it was, mostly black people out there. And, if you were in the white neighborhoods, the cops kind of just waved to you and rode by. But now, I see how they treat natives and black people. You hear about like stories like almost every day. They shoot them in the back as they walk away, and they have interactions with like someone who's waiting for their kid to get off the bus and they get shot. So now, when I think about police, I don't think about them the same way I did as I was growing up.
Mm-hmm. I realized the other day, slightly, like the degree to which I was sheltered, which wasn't that too much, but it was. I didn't necessarily grow up with the idea that I was sheltered at all, but I realized that I was to at least this degree, because I realized that I grew up kind of knowing and understanding always why most black people and most people of color like had this tense relationship with law enforcement. I understood that implicitly, just being a black man, but I understood you understand things on another level when you start seeing things happen to your uncles and your cousins, and now it's not just like stories like in the paper. Like I can actually tell you about different times. I have friends. I have a Hispanic friend who has an incident with himself and a cop on tape, and it's completely outrageous what the cop is like doing and saying. But I kind of just, I don't know. Like I was saying, I realized the other day the degree to which I had been sheltered, because I kind of did have, even knowing that there were bad people who were in these positions and who were abusing their power and who were really serving this much larger architecture because that's another thing that you kind of have to find out on your own. Like, I didn't grow up in history classes that taught me about like the foundation of the police, how it's tied to slavery and colonialism and stuff like that. That is. So I understood a little bit more the argument that, you know, most cops are just people who, you know, just want to, you know, do their job and go home, and are people just like you, because I felt like I knew a lot of cops like that. But you realize that, like I said, as you get older, that like it does, those individual cops can still serve the purpose which I've just described, which is kind of like to increase the stratification among communities of color, which I was actually listening to a podcast the other day, and one of the hosts said that pretty much explicitly, that that's how a lot of people of color's interactions with the police end up going. If there are social services that we need, a lot of increasingly, they're only being offered to folks like drug rehabilitation or mental health services. A lot of times that's only being offered to people after they've had like this negative encounter with the cops, because we have this system that's set up that's punitive. It's about punishing people. It's about making people atone. It's not about getting, you know, mentally ill people the help that they need so they can live, you know, full, successful lives. If they need, you know, some kind of chemical or medical treatment, or if it's something else that they need, they can also get that. Our systems aren't set up to do that. One of the interesting things about Ferguson, when the federal government released its report on that I found really interesting, was that there was finally an admission that the police were targeting communities of color precisely because of budgetary shortfalls. So, like, the city doesn't want to raise taxes, or it's had tax increase proposals that have been shot down because, you know, lowering taxes is always a good applause line, but the city still needs this money. So now the city is going to make up the money that it needs by targeting communities that are less able to fight back. So I'm going to give, you know, I'm going to ticket African Americans and, you know, dark skinned people, Native people, Hispanic people, people of color. I'm going to ticket them more because they're less likely to have lawyers that are going to come with them to court to fight all of these different things that I'm going to throw at them. They're most likely just going to get the money, scrounge up the money, and pay the ticket. And we're going to, I mean, there are cities in America that 20–30% of their budget depends on these kinds of things. So that was one of the more useful things that I felt came out of the report on Ferguson. And like I said, it's just learning all of this stuff. You kind of stop being satisfied with the oh, but there are good cops kind of argument. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about whether there are people who are good and who are exercising whatever rights that they have as police officers to keep the community safe. Like, that's not stopping the cycle of punitiveness. And those people who are quote unquote good people can still serve this structure, you know, not even fully realizing that this is how all of these things operate in our society.
Yeah, and I think too, you know, if you get away from the rural areas and you get into the areas like near Indian reservations in the Dakotas or New Mexico, or even in Michigan, when I went up to Petoskey near a reservation in the northern lower peninsula a couple months ago, and one of the guys that lives there was telling me, you know, about what he does for a living and just describing his lifestyle and everything. And the subject came up about the police in Petoskey, and he goes, "Oh yeah," he says, "they beat up Indians all the time." He says they'll beat them up right on the street, and he said that the town was really the haves and the have-nots, is the ultra rich that live right on Lake Michigan, and then there's the poor communities, and they're right next door to each other, and they just abuse the native kids all the time. He said it's a known fact.
Right. It's because when you don't have the access that you need to challenge them in the system, and then people put all their faith in things like body cameras, And I kind of said from the beginning of that whole conversation that like I was fine with body cameras. I want body cameras. I feel like every cop should have a body camera. But I kind of felt that the faith that people were putting in that one solution alone to just bring about the solution, I kind of felt that it was naive, just because we've seen things on tape before. Like Rodney King was on tape, and all of those cops walked. Like they were not punished, but it was on tape. Like the abuse that they did. It's not that we have not seen these things on tape. Right now, because of the internet, there's like this inundation of, video that you can now see. You can like watch hours upon hours of this stuff, whereas before you can only absorb it on the news or in a lot narrower of context. But it's not that we haven't seen it. I hate to say it, but with the people who are watching the tapes, like we just seem to have a larger segment of our society that is not moved enough by these sites to do anything or to say anything about it.
Yeah. It just seems like you see more and more, and like in New Jersey, they probably like 15 years ago or so, they were racial profiling, and it was always a black person on the side of the road pulled over. You could have a car where the 5 people that are white speed by doing 80 miles an hour. One black person comes by and they pull them over. So they target darker skinned people, and it's how they get their money. And then they make money off of sending them to prison now. Now prisons have like a vacancy. They want to fill that. They get their money. Cops get their money. Judges get their money. And they take advantage of these people who can't afford lawyers and end up having their freedoms taken away. And, then they're in prison working, It's almost like slave labor all over again. You lost your freedom, and now you're in jail working, and it's minorities. But the whole cop thing is, there's a lot of KKK in the police system, and they are the ones that target. The other ones look the other way. That with the cop on, you don't say anything bad against the other cops, and then they have the cameras now, but they turn them off, or they put the hood of their car up,
right, and
they beat them up. They do it all off. They know how to do it off camera and do it away from the camera, but they treat people differently, and they're doing roadside justice instead of letting our justice system take care of it, where the people go before a judge. The cops are doing it on the side of the road.
I have an uncle who suffered police brutality. I have a cousin who suffered police brutality. I won't say where they live, but I have a cousin who made a Facebook post maybe 4 or 5 months ago that was just talking about the areas that we grew up in and how there's a police officer pretty much on every corner, especially when it's getting off of work time. She expressed several times that she felt like this was all kind of very targeted at, because where this is a very kind of, there are other races here, but it's primarily black and white people. But there are more Hispanics who have moved into the area recently, and I'm sure there have always been Native people there. But she was basically saying that she felt that this was targeted. And as I thought about all the people that I know who still live, in my hometown, most of them live out in the country now. Most of them don't live within the city itself. My grandparents and great-grandparents have always kind of been rural folks. So another kind of measure of protection I had against this atmosphere of intense intense kind of, I don't know what you would call it, lockdown almost, like, was that I did have rural relatives who, kind of like Julie was talking about, like people kind of tend to themselves in rural communities. So during the summer, I had somewhere that I could go and play and not be kind of like on the street, like coming back and forth from, a relative's house and maybe having these interactions, which is what a lot of my peers were doing. They lived, where they lived. They didn't necessarily have relatives that lived in like the rural parts of the state. So they pretty much were under the guise of the police department all summer. So as you can imagine, with that level of kind of just examination, like you can find a million things to arrest people for if every community was getting, that level of attention. But one of the things I noticed, because I came to a pretty big college, was I didn't do a lot of partying. I always had to work. But the parties that I did go to, and then when I would live next door to people who would party, I would say fewer than 2 or 3% of them ever got broken up by the police. And like these were definitely people who were, drinking underage, doing drugs. Some of this I witnessed, some of this I can just infer from, the sounds that I would hear through my walls, because I stayed in pretty cheap places for a long, 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 long time. But I just noticed that I didn't see like the level of arrest that I saw like growing up as a kid. As a kid, even my great grandmother has this kind of like dislike of police. I remember something that she said to me about 10 years ago about all her life, police officers have been just arresting black people for the smallest of pretenses. So it's definitely intergenerational, but it has been interesting being afforded the opportunity to go to certain like university spaces and kind of see the difference, to see how it was for other people. So I understand why maybe a person in like the general population who's white, who maybe comes from a certain level of income, I understand why they have a trusting relationship with the cops, because if what I saw was a good indication, and I believe that it was, they're not under the same microscope. They're not under the same, pressure. So they're a lot more trusting. In fact, a lot of them that I met through college, the ones whose minds I was able to change, usually they would be changed because they would either be with me during some kind of negative interaction, or we would just have mutual friends who were there. It doesn't become real to a lot of people until those moments. And that's kind of another thing that we face collectively. And I feel that we have to find some way to solve, because the torture porn and the watching the videos all the time, I honestly had to step back from that, just because it was driving me crazy to see some person be shot every other day. Sometimes they would be mentally ill. Sometimes they...
Yeah. Like, when did mental illness become a crime? I mean, if you're black and mentally ill, you get shot. If you're white, you get taken away for treatment.
Why do we even shoot mentally ill people? Even if they were armed, they don't do that in Europe. Like, there's a whole different number that you call when someone is having a mental health crisis.
Medical issue.
Right. This is a mental health crisis, and it's just...
That's what I say. It's like, goes back to the cops being more of a KKK mentality, white supremacy. It's almost like they enjoy beating up on somebody, or using I shot him as a defense instead of retraining them.
Well, I think that control freaks are just drawn to the to the law enforcement profession.
Yeah.
I just,
yep.
yeah, I think they want to be in control, and and the fact that we have so many returning military people that are already trained how to use a gun and trained in combat, and those people are assuming those roles in law enforcement. And if you've been trained to kill, you've got that in your brain. And I just don't think that's a good combination myself. I mean, you have to really be, I guess, in control of yourself and know and not be.
There was a study that I just recently saw that was saying that police officers that have had combat experience in the military are more likely to shoot people, and that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, if they're trigger happy, it's like shoot first, ask questions later.
And that also makes me fear for like what our wars are doing to people, like the kind of wars that the United States is opting to participate in, and the consequences that that has on our society, and like how it's just like this negative feedback loop, it feels like, of this aggression begetting aggression. And we keep telling ourselves that like we can solve the solution of like gun violence with more guns. Like the solution isn't limiting them. The solution isn't having these more complex debates in society about the Second Amendment, about what that means, about is that something that we still need in this society? Is that something that is still beneficial in that society? Now, different people are going to answer that different ways, but one of the things that frustrates me about living here is the extent to which we just accept certain things. We just accept that certain violence is just preordained. Some populations are just already guilty, and it can feel really, really difficult to challenge those notions. I don't mean to be like a Debbie Downer, but
yeah,
I mean this is a tough conversation, especially since it's been happening for so long. Like there's a great book called Slavery by Another Name, and it kind of details the creation of prisons and that cops as like a profession after the Civil War, and it kind of details how like tens of thousands of young black boys found themselves victim to this institution where they were essentially re-enslaved shortly after slavery for pretenses like speaking too loudly in the presence of a white woman, or whistling, or like they had sundown towns, which meant that you could not be in that town when the sun went down. As a black person during this time, a person had the right to come up and ask you at any time, like a white person, like where the money in your pocket was from, and if you couldn't go or point to someone in town that you were employed by, you'd likely fall victim to vagrancy laws, which were basically just like, you don't look like you have a job, we're taking you to jail. And the book just kind of details how, people fell into slavery pretty much for all of their lives, because once you're convicted, and I think this has remained true throughout time, once you're convicted, no one really cares about you. Like being thrown in jail in this system is social death.
Once you're part of the system, it's almost like you're in the system for life. It follows you, and then you're more likely for them to put you in jail again because you were on there. Even black teenagers are treated different than white teenagers. They become part of the system. They don't try discipline. It's jail.
I was going to ask, because I had a question in one of the groups that I run when I was talking about what our collective experiences with the police officers might be. Do you feel that natives who are, say, darker in complexion are targeted more by the police?
They take anybody darker, no matter what race. The darker you are, the more they target you.
I think so. Yeah,
Because
I think
there were just
so.
some questions about, oh, well, how would the person know that they were Native? But I was trying to think of things other than they hang around reservations, because I know that most Native people live off of reservations,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that they do that, hang around because they hang around where we always are, or where they think that will be. So I'm sure that there is that as well. But
Mhm.
I did want to address that because that was just one question that I saw that came up.
Yeah, yeah. If you're identifiable as not being white, or you look dark haired, dark skinned, yeah, they're gonna treat you differently than they would someone they thought was the same as them. You know,
And
a white police officer.
I just remember coming up and feeling like, because I was always told as a kid, oh, you speak so well and you're going to be fine. And I don't know, some part of me up until about 3 years ago believed that, oh, if I could just have a conversation with anyone, I can like change their mind. At least during that conversation, I can, influence them. But
Mhm.
the death of Tamir Rice really, really proved how wrong that was for me. Just because
Mhm.
if you could look at that baby and kill that kid, say that kid looked like the cop was saying that he looked like he was like 18. Tamir Rice, in every picture I have ever seen of him, looks like a baby. Looks like
Yeah.
an 11 or 12-year-old kid. That's what he is. So if you quote unquote thought that kid was 18, then I don't know what you must see when you look at me.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And back on that subject of the military people coming over and taking these jobs, if they view civilian life like they do military life overseas, where they're the protectors and the enemy is the other side, they come back home and think, well, we're in control and we're out the other side is the enemy.
Hmm.
And now with the proliferation of guns, everybody's armed, so the enemy is armed. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And the kids are all playing video games where they're blowing up and shooting everybody, and just like violence. You can't watch a movie anymore without seeing at least 5 or 6 bombs go off. Every action movie has got people getting their heads blown off, and it's people are desensitized to the whole thing, and that may be part of why society is accepting a lot of this stuff anymore from the media. What we're seeing on TV.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
we were growing up, we didn't see that, on TV as much. It would be on late at night. Now kids see it, 24/7. They can, all the cable channels and all their video games are all violent.
I mean, I don't know. And then the culture itself, for me, a lot of things just, I'll always return to cultures because it's the same thing that you two are speaking of as well. I think that it's just, yeah, we do live in a culture even that just downplays the effects of violence all the time. That we don't seem to think, or even our heroes. I notice when I analyze movies, because I kind of studied films in school for a little bit. Sometimes I'll be doing it from a little bit more of an academic standpoint, but I'll be really, really interested in how a lot of the actions of our heroes are never like questioned. And I think when you couple that, which is kind of like a hypothetical thing, with then also like this culture's love of violence, I do wonder what effect it has on kids especially. But obviously it's not just kids, because I mean these are adults. These are adults who are in these
Mhm.
roles as kids. And I mean, if he is going on 30, then he was born in the late 80s, early 90s. If he's older than that, then I'd be interested in like the breakdown, like if we have the proper statistics that we need on police shootings that we don't actually keep. I'd be interested in if there's like an age differential between older cops are more likely to do this, younger cops are more or less likely to do that. I'd be interested in those studies, but you kind of find out coming up that we don't even keep all the data that we need to really study this issue because we're so attached to guns.
Yeah, I do think cops and their training and their physical health needs to be studied more. Cops in general just need some kind of retraining across the board.
I think that they need retraining, but I also feel that the purview of cops needs to be limited. Like, I don't know why can't we have, say, some like independent body that like looks into murders, or I don't know. I want some kind of whole-scale review of what cops even like do in society, and I feel like we should have that continuously. I feel that part of the thing that is burdening our society is that we're asking people to do everything, to control traffic and to respond to accidents and to solve murders, and that's just a lot for one organization, even an organization that's confined to a city or so a specific geopolitical location. That's just a lot to ask of any organization, and I'm just most interested today in things that like just reimagine society without like cops having like this unlimited purview or this unlimited list of things that they call and respond to.
Well, when you compare it to other countries, I think we need to study how other countries do it, and they don't have the high prison rate. And, we could base the system off of theirs, which seems to be working better than what we have now. And, but the thing is, everybody's making money off of this. And it's the people that don't have the voice that are the victims. And, you shouldn't be in jail for marijuana. You should be in jail if you killed somebody or raped somebody. But, it's like, a lot of minorities end up in jail for nonviolent offenses.
Right.
And, it's just, that's the crazy stuff, and nobody cares.
I also read recently that like half of the people shot by police are mentally ill. They have some type of mental illness, over half.
Wow.
Yeah, that goes back to our health care, our lack of health care that doesn't, that is below standards than a lot of other countries. But they'd rather lock them up than treat them.
Right.
Well, that's what happened when Ronald Reagan, that's what he did. He closed all the facilities and the mental
dumped them on the street.
Dumped them on the streets, and then every society just has to deal with them, and they have nowhere to go to get care, and that's how we ended up with that problem.
So that's just terrible. And so, like, a lot of those people, because they probably do have families who can't either be there physically with them all the time, or who maybe just don't have the means of getting the person the help. And so, it's especially in a system where you need a job, even under the Obamacare, to be able to buy into this insurance market, you need a job. So if you struggle for any reason in obtaining that, that might not really help you a lot. It's just so perverse how we do. Everything is just so punitive. It's about punishing people. It's about
making money off of
punishing people and presupposing that certain communities are always guilty, making money off of them, and then like punishing them for what we or our society says is their problem, which is usually just being poor.
Yeah, it's just oppressing people,
That mental health thing, I had an incident when I lived in Columbus, Ohio, and we were just driving, my husband and I were driving down the street, and we stopped for a stop sign, and a guy came running up behind us, and his bicycle had a flat tire, and he picked his bicycle up and he threw it at our car. And
Wow.
it didn't break the window, but he put a big scratch on. And I said, "What in the heck is wrong with that guy?" And then he started walking down the street and talking to himself. And so we called the police because we needed to make a report for the insurance and all that. And he goes, "Oh yeah, that guy's out here all the time." And he said, "We'll go talk to him." And that was it. So I guess it was a routine thing for the guy to be just running around doing that stuff. And it's like nobody knows how to handle that. He stays at home with his mother. His mother can't tie him up in a chair and make him,
Yeah, it's like, what did she do? My great-grandmother, my great-uncle Henry, had a mental disability before he passed away. But, I mean, he had a great and long life. But part of my deep understanding and like my worry from that issue does have come from that personal experience of kind of like wondering what would my great uncle be doing, or like what would happen to him if he did have to was in this position where he was just like wandering the streets and like obviously in need of help. But I mean, if he were to throw a bicycle at someone's car, okay, well they might need to call the police or do something so that they can get that taken care of on an insurance basis. So they might not be maliciously intending anything bad to happen to him, but because of how our systems are set up and because the police are going to end up responding to that, how even like those normal incidences can like lead to imprisonment and just this cycle for people who really, really just need help.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really trying to disrupt that, or just that's why I'm so interested, I guess, in pulling back the scope of what police respond to. I just don't feel that most police need to be at a situation involving a mentally ill person, and that's just a beginning step. Because I also want to get like the police video out of the hands of the police. Like it does no good for us to have cops on camera that they can then edit themselves or turn off. I feel like that feed from their cameras should go to an independent body, if that's something that we need to create on the state level. If I'm inside a cop video and I feel like I was abused, I should have the right to see it and access it. Right now what they do is they play all of these little games trying to hide what they have on tape to the very last moment in the hopes that you're going to take a plea deal, which oftentimes is not in, a poor person's best interest. So I just feel like there needs to be a total re-examining of what cops respond to in society, and then even broader than that, we need to be examining their function. And then we also just, with the police camera stuff, that needs to be out. There's just too large of a conflict of interest between them.
Yeah, the fox shouldn't be guarding the hen house.
Right.
Did you happen to see that in the news with the director of the Michigan State Police Department made that comment on her Facebook page, and she came under scrutiny, and she made a remark about people that were degenerates for kneeling at the football games. Yeah, well, it ended up that the Legislative Black Caucus in Michigan demanded that she meet with them, and she ended up getting 5 days off, I think paid or unpaid, I can't remember now, but 5 days off work, and she should have been fired. That was a disgrace.
Yeah, they always seem to get it paid,
It's always paid, and then it's always about using language that separates. They want to remove any justification that you, as the quote-unquote guilty party, might have to be innocent. They don't want any suggestions that maybe their institution needs to change or they were in the wrong. So it's always like set up in these terms, almost like good and evil. Like we're the good guys, we do X, and then they're the bad guys, they do Y. And if you're a good guy, if you support, a civil society, quote unquote, then you need to support the good guys who are doing X. It's like there's no gray area, there's no room for both people to be culpable. There's no room for only them to be culpable or not being as transparent as there needs to be. You're at fault.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of their points of view.
Mm-hmm. I got a question about the black cops that work in the black communities.
Mm-hmm.
Do the citizens have as much distrust of them, or are they have a better relationship, or what?
I can only speak obviously for myself, but I would say that most black people distrust cops, period. Like whether you're black, we might have a little bit more trust in a black officer, but honestly, the 5 black sheriffs who kind of coached my little league team, I trusted most of those people. I trusted all of those men. Growing up though, I started to see like if there's like one black cop and he's like in a crowd of white cops, a lot of times the person I'm most concerned about is the black cop, because sometimes people of color who join those organizations, they have to demonstrate that like they're not soft and like they're not the weak link in the chain or the person who the criminal runs to. So sometimes I've been in situations where they're worse than anyone else. So in general, I just advise people not to talk to cops.
Yeah, I think they tend to take on that cop mentality where it's all them against you. You know, they're no longer protecting the people. They're you know, like a military operation, you know. They forget that, you know, they're supposed to be helping us, and here they are causing the problem.
And if your chief commander is and he most likely will be, if he's white, and if all the people who you have to get a leg up with are white, and they have like this certain expectation, and like there's this system, this punitive system that you work for that encourages you to arrest and punish people. In fact, like during holiday times, like there are bonuses that will be given for, you know, you're supposed to bring in so many people because DUI and stuff like that. But when you have that kind of a system and then you want to maybe get a promotion, I mean, you got to perform for the people who are going to be given the promotion. Like people, I mean, maybe I would have a little bit more trust in a black cop depending on how he approached the situation and maybe how big or small the situation was. But just in general, I just don't talk to cops. And it's not because I have anything to hide or even because I'm uncomfortable around them, because I've been around them, like I said, most of my life. It's just, I don't know why you're talking to me. Like, why are you talking to me? Are you trying to like establish a timeline to tie me to something that I didn't even have anything to do with or don't know anything about? Are you trying to, what are you doing? I just don't talk to cop guys. That's my advice.
Yeah. Well, I know that the Native population, not so much on my reservation because it's new. We have tribal police, and we have plenty of police. But it is a little bit suspicion and distrust. We have some Native, some white police, tribal police officers, and some Native. But I know on the bigger reservations, like the Navajo reservation and some of the reservations in the Dakotas, that where they have a whole big territory and very, very few police officers to patrol and cover that jurisdiction, that they're way understaffed and that you just don't have enough people, and a lot of things go on, you know, untended to, and things go on that should be taken care of, and they just don't have the manpower.
Right.
You know, but that's the situation on the bigger reservations, and just way too few police officers.
And what if folks had just a smaller list of things that they responded to? Do you think that would maybe help? Like if there was another entity that our society could have to solve some of these smaller things, things that don't, well, I used to think that maybe the cameras, the cameras could do like the traffic thing, but then there was like this whole thing where everyone and their mom was like getting a ticket. So, but
Yeah.
even if it's a combination of something, I just feel like the purview of the police needs to be pulled way, 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 way back.
Yeah, they do have a lot of responsibility for a lot of different situations that they have. Even with animal control, some police officers even go capture dogs and things, and
Right.
yeah.
Like we can have another group that tends to that, like that. Yeah.
Yeah, you have one cop that's, he's kind of like jack of all trades, whether it's a health issue, animal control, break-in, it just goes on and on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder even just, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And the training that they have to go through varies, because some of the little rural areas, you don't have to have any very little training at all. You just have to know how to shoot a gun, and you have to pass a physical or be able to lift so many pounds, and I mean that's it.
And right, and why does that qualify you to necessarily like solve murders or I don't know who should be necessarily solving the murders in society, but I'm not convinced that it's the people that we currently have. And that's no disrespect or dishonor to them necessarily, or like that's not even saying that you're all one way or you all cops do this or do that. It's just I just don't think it's best for society.
They respond to that, and then a detective will take over, if it's a homicide. Right. Unless you're on a place where the police do it all,
I wonder what that breakdown is.
But there's also when you get near a reservation and you're on the border of the reservation and off the reservation, you have the conflicts with that. Some of the reservations they have no jurisdiction when someone flees. They can't chase them, and I think they're trying to change some of that relationship now. So if you commit a crime, they can go after you.
Right. I would say that I didn't even know that they would have. I thought it might be something similar to like here where I am, like we're near the border. So like the border police, they just changed something where they can chase people who can flee. But there has been an increase in like border deaths. I wonder if those two things are really related. So obviously people should be able to apprehend someone who has committed a crime, but I do still worry about just knowing what's happened here near the border and like how there have been migrants killed. And the police say that they were running or that they were a danger, but sometimes there's not really a whole lot of hard evidence or physical evidence that really supports a lot of those claims. So
yeah. Well, you ever see like some of the laws where they have like where they're trying to pass a thing where if you can't wear a hoodie, or you can't, like in New Jersey, they don't want you to wear saggy pants. So different minorities will wear, their clothes a different way, and it's like doesn't matter if someone has saggy pants on. I'm more concerned about someone carrying a gun. Just like when the Mexicans were here, then they started targeting marijuana because a lot of the Mexicans had it. They were bringing it up. So they target, they go after different things dependent on different races.
I have heard of a few laws where people were trying to I kind of heard that in like the early 2000s a lot too. People like passing ordinances against like saggy pants and stuff like that. I would be really, really interested in how any of those laws would actually survive in a court battle, because that seems like a First Amendment violation. Just off the top of my head, it seems like one, but I have heard of folks doing that, and that's kind of crazy. Texas is also kind of where I am. It's really, really bad for targeting Hispanics and Black, especially. I have friends who are from Brownsville. This really, really South Texas. They just have terrible stories about like entire roads pretty much being like checkpoints where the police just pull you over to the side and just like ask you all these questions. If they find out or think that you're an illegal immigrant, they'll do all this stuff, and it's crazy.
I know that the natives in Arizona and New Mexico get harassed a lot because they think police think they're Mexicans or illegal aliens or whatever they undocumented.
And what does an
people.
illegal alien look like? How are you even determining that? Like,
yeah. Well, the ICE is just another form of police.
Right.
You know, so they do the same thing all the other police do, and you know they get away with it, and they have been getting away with it. But now with the internet, you know, everybody's sharing their stories, and they're not going to be able to get away with it as much as they would like.
And like
you know, until Trump came along, and then you know Trump targets every minority he can.
The thing about like the border situation with ICE, one of the things that I always thought was funny is that like the people who live here and who are super like pro keeping illegal aliens out, like so very, very conservative people, like they typically have no idea what those kind of jobs entail, and so it's usually just one agent like guarding like this impossibly large swath. Like the border is like something like over 2,000 miles long. So it's like you guarding like this impossibly large area. You usually don't even see another person. And then we also have an issue that's very, very underreported where the people who are bringing drugs, the cartels who are operating out of those areas, because they usually only have to interface with one police officer, we have a huge problem with corruption where there'll be corrupt agents who are basically waving these people through. So like we're not stopping what we're supposed to be stopping because the border is too long and it's too porous for us to really provide the level of monitoring that we're telling people that we're going to be providing. And we're creating a situation where folks are very susceptible to bribes from the people that you may want to stop, or you know the people that you do want to stop. Like, it's so counterintuitive. Any final thoughts here? I didn't think so. This has been a great panel, by the way. We've kind of gone a little bit over time. I want to thank both of you. I think that we should continue this, well, not this particular conversation, but we'll continue talking about kind of issues that obviously concern our two communities next week. I want to thank you both for calling in with me here tonight and wish you a good evening. I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.